Everybody ready?
There's 4 up here.
Good evening and welcome to our June Committee of the Whole meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our June Committee of the Whole meeting. The Board of Trustees of Cypress-Fairbanks Independent School District is now convened in a Committee of the Whole meeting on Thursday, June 23rd, 2016 in the boardroom of the Cypress-Fairbanks Independent School District Instructional Support Center, 10300 Jones Road, Houston, Texas at 6 p.m. for the purpose of reviewing that portion of the Monday, June 27th, 2016 school board agenda designated as action items and to hear designated reports and recognitions posted in the meeting notice as required by Texas law. No action will be taken at this meeting. I want to welcome the members of our audience and our television viewers to this meeting of the Board of Trustees. As the Cypress-Fairbanks Board of Trustees, we are here to set goals, listen to reports, approve budgets, contracts, personnel appointments, and make policy for the district. It is not the role of the board to make day-to-day operational decisions. The management and day-to-day operations of the district are the responsibility of the superintendent. We have policies and procedures in place to resolve concerns and issues. This is a public meeting of the Board of Trustees, not a meeting of the public. Prior to this meeting, board members received information related to items on tonight's agenda. Agenda items will not necessarily be handled in the order listed on the notice. The meeting is open to all who wish to attend and hear the matters discussed. During the course of this meeting, the board may determine that a closed session is necessary. In that event, the board will meet in closed session to consider matters duly posted for this meeting as permitted by sections 551.071 to 551.084 inclusive of the Texas Government Code. These proceedings are airing live on CFTV Channel 16 and CFTV online on the district website. There will also be rebroadcast throughout the month on Channel 16 and available as video on demand at me.
Didn't sound like it.
Nope.
There you go.
There we go. For the tape to adequately reflect the proceedings, I respectfully ask that you please refrain from talking while others are speaking and that all cell phones are turned off or in silent mode. Thank you for taking the time to join us this evening and for your interest in the Cypress-Fairbanks Independent School District. I don't see any Community Leadership Committee members here, and we don't have our AVP students. So we'll begin with our report section. Do we have them? No. The board will hear the following reports. 5 reports. 5A, the administration will provide a report on the Cypress-Fairbanks ISD demographic update completed by Population and Survey Analyst, PASA. I believe Teresa will start that report. Teresa, Ms. Hull?
Good evening, Dr. Henry, President Mongoya, and Board of Trustees. This evening, our demographers, Dr. Stacy Tapera and Dr. Pat Guzman from Population and Survey Analyst are here to provide you with the demographic update for the district. They'll provide a brief presentation, but I would like to point out that you have a very large binder at your place that will provide you with much more detailed information related to the information that they're going to be sharing in their presentation. The demographic update that PASA provides to us on an annual basis does include the study of current student locations, potential growth in the district, housing trends and patterns that we may see occurring throughout the district, and economic factors that may influence our growth and influence our planning decisions. So they'll give you a brief overview of that, and again, you can certainly dig into more detail in the binder information that's provided. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Guzman for the presentation.
Thank you. It is good to be here this evening, and we do have a brief summary. I hope if you feel that comments are warranted. We certainly would appreciate any ways that you might want to add to the data that we're presenting this evening. First, it might be important to keep in mind that although the district has increased at tremendous rates in large numbers, I believe 2005 was the last really large increase of almost 7,000 students added in 1 year in the district. This past year, there was a net of under 940 students added. The reason being is that so many of the built-out subdivisions, and if you'll forgive me, I'll show you this map just once, but it's easier to see this in paper form than squashed on a slide. But everywhere that's blue is a built-out subdivision. And I'm sorry, did I say we were from A&M? So the blue represents the built-out subdivisions. Yellow there are typically the built-out apartments. So those areas represent the vast majority of the district. And there were 1,300 students lost in those blue subdivisions as the parents are emptying their nests and as those subdivisions age. You can see here that the district statewide is 15th in regard to the number of students added. And of course, in just that 10-year period where it was always first, Frisco has leaped into the fray with that honor. Then it's good too to see that the growth is basically slowing annually, even though again you have to keep in mind that you have the epicenter of residential growth on the Grand Parkway. So you've got a lot of anomalies, or a bifurcated district, I guess, a lot of differences. Now, importantly, we look at kindergarten enrollment every year because those kindergartners are going to affect the bulges that you see throughout the next 12 school years in the district. But there was a big decline this year in kindergarten. And we see that one reason for that decline is that if we look at the geocoded births, that is where we've located the addresses of the births 5 years ago in the district, that there was a downturn in births, and the reasons for that again are the aging of the population in the blue subdivisions, but also the active subdivisions are higher price points now, and those younger homeowners are moving in less than they did historically. So here then we're going to just zip through the private and charter school list. I think you've got the longest list of any district that we work with, but wherever you see yellow, you know that those blue columns represent what is currently the case of estimated attendance by students whose place of residence is Cy-Fair ISD. And again, I'm sorry, you can see that Cypress Christian and others have quite large enrollments from within this district. And then we can see the conclusion is that about 3% of the total student population, that would be almost 14,000 students plus this 3,600. Is represented in charter and private schools. It's gone up a bit with the inclusion of charter schools in and near the district. And then if we look 5 years forward with the green columns, you can see that we expect a slight increase. Even though the school district is increasing as well in projected enrollment, the charter schools are going to increase slightly faster than the Cy-Fair enrollment. Employment trends we could talk about, I guess, for days. This is a map that shows there are 111 major employers in the district. These are employee work epicenters and affect the desire of individuals to be near these places of work. And of course, it's interesting too that such a high percent of manufacturing jobs are in the district, and that's always been the case. And of course, right now, some of those are greatly troubled because they're tied to the energy industry. But on the other hand, and you can see manufacturing is 12% of all jobs of residents who live in the district. Medical and educational services are the largest sector of those who work and live in the district, 17%. But we see that unemployment is picking up a little bit, 4.3% for the city, 4.8% for the county, and that's definitely an uptick, not only this past year, but even 6 months prior to that. So we do know that this oil price slump is different from the past. And it's important to keep that in mind because we're not going to see a leap upward to what has been such a boom era just so recently. One reason that won't happen is that in the past 2 and even 3 downturns, there were those in energy jobs that were relocated, reshuffled into Houston from out of state. And so that saved districts that had been very dependent, like Katy, for example. They did not lose a single student. The net remained the same, no change. And there were furloughs and other ways that the downturn was handled. This time, because the U.S. was producing virtually the same amount as OPEC, that has not been easily resolved and won't be. And so the price may never most likely return. And that's going to have an ongoing impact on these districts that were the most embroiled and heavily tied to energy jobs. And at the same time, though, if we look at the and I don't know if it's next here in the slides, but we'll see shortly that this district was very little affected overall in terms of housing starts. That's the most near-term, immediate, real measure that we can use. I'm sorry, I can't say the word real as one syllable. I've tried. Housing projections, you can see that the district is one of the most built-out districts that we work with. Everything in purple means it's done, it's through. And then the gold means that there are plans, at least a concept plan, and only 13% of the district has no definitive plan that we've gotten our hands on. So that's a very small percent of the district where there are no plans, and yet there are at least 2 acres available to develop. So the district's getting built out rapidly. Here again you see that statistic that while 2,000 students were added to the active subdivisions, those subdivisions that were not blue on the map, that the blue subdivisions lost 1,300. At the same time, apartments were adding students and condos, a small number as well. Now, one thing that we've tried to do, and if you ever have a chance or can even take a few moments to look at that heavy report, page 84 shows an interesting map of where the extensions of roads are, expansions of roads, and more or less the timing is defined by color. And I think it's at least very helpful to me that we've put that information together in one location, because it points out where there are undeveloped parcels that will immediately be able to develop more easily and make it more fruitful for the landowner. At the same time, I wanted to mention that while the Panama Canal is far, far away, it's within months now of being much wider and being able to move, instead of 13 cargo containers, 20. And that's going to have a massive impact not only on the Port of Houston, but on Freeport's port. And that means that this district, which has a manufacturing component that continues to grow, is going to be positively impacted by that characteristic. And of course, the Dakin plant that's just outside the district has 40% now of the new industrial square footage underway. So there's a lot happening in and around this district, and manufacturers are moving into the district even while we see this downturn. And then, of course, you know about the railway stop where the Texas Central Railway plan to be completed. And so I thought those were important to keep in mind. And at the same time, the red represents last year's land sales. So you can see where speculation is occurring. The green 1 year before. Some of those red areas are actually the strange shaped ones, golf courses and water supply district purchases. Then here you're looking at the southwest part of the District 2, and you can see those big sales, part of which are FedEx and the rest residential development. Now, these are the parcels that are for sale via a nationwide registry, so that it's important to keep in mind what's being purchased. That's at least future purchases. Some of these, though, have been for sale quite a while, and many on the west are going to be used for residential purposes. Now, the MUDs and water infrastructure are important to follow, and you know, again, we don't work with any district that has 309 MUDs except this district. At the same time, it is important to keep in mind that there is such a challenge in this district. Of the 62 districts in the consolidated metro area, this district has the most floodway. And while we try to find ways with detention and channelization to make areas on the west work for us, I think there's got to be ongoing constraint and consideration of how much development can occur, and some portions that were planned for development may not reach fruition. Now, this district, I've noted, has survived well. It's ranking now 4th of the 62 districts in housing starts right now as of the end of March, that first quarter of 2016. And the housing starts remained stable. There was just a negligible downturn, very negligible. And the new home closings, though, declined 8%, and the number of vacant lots shot up 27% in a year's time. So here is the table I wanted to show you, to see in yellow the districts that were more affected than was Cyfair. So these districts are also large. They've been high growth. Lamar, Klein, Fort Bend, Katy, and then Houston ISD has been high growth with residential, but about 90 or 93% has been townhomes and condos of those what we call single family dwellings. And so you can see the impact has been great in other areas. Of course, condos and townhomes are always the first to start to decline, and yet it's a surprise to see Katy having declined 24% since they managed to survive fairly well historically. Here, if you look at the rightmost column, are the largest increases expected. And you know, the last 4 times that a master plan community has been featured in either the Chronicle or in the community impact newspaper, it's been about Bridgeland. And you see here that it really has the same number of expected homes to be added as the next 4. This may be exaggerating a little, it's not quite the same, but generally speaking, you can see the impact of Bridgeland and the importance it has for this district, especially since it's had challenges and ups and downs, fluctuating probably more greatly than any of us would like in terms of trying to plan for new schools. And here you see a summary, it's also in the report, about these largest of the developments and how many of them are going to build out in the next 5 years. So a lot is happening on the west side of the district, and very important growth tied with student growth. The largest multifamily developments for the next very short period are in Bridgeland and also over the long term. So we know that we have to concentrate on that set of developments, on the Town Lake, Town Center, and other developments there that will have multifamily, as well as Ellison and the Ursa Gray Perry Homes project. Within 10 years, we anticipate that there will be around 225,600 homes and multifamily units in the district. Right now, there are about 184,000. And this represents basically about 38,500 added housing units. And this might look like a large number that is hard to see how we're going to narrow down where these entities are that are adding the most, but we have actually driven every active lot of every active subdivision to gather this data, and so we're able, hopefully, to accurately define the locational configuration of growth. And again, in comparing the total housing projected to other districts, you see that Cyfair ranks third over the next 10-year period, partially because it's building out. Katie's still growing north, south, east, and west, as is Lamar. Now, again, we need to know that relative to last year's projections, over the long term, over the next 10 years, we've projected 3,300 less housing units. That would be multifamily and single family. So this is a big change. And it's due to several factors. One is the oil price situation had a massive impact on, say, Bridgeland, where there are large parcels there that are just ready for development, ready for infrastructure, and it is now occurring, but it was delayed. And at the same time, with the FedEx 484 acres, that gave hope to other landowners who always would have liked to have sold their parcel for 3 times more for commercial rather than residential, and now they're going to hope or hold out some consideration to have more commercial land use. And Ellison, for example, within Cyfair, has said they would like to have no single-family units, and they had planned about 8 large subdivisions. So whether that will become a reality is unknown to us now. We've estimated 600 housing units and multifamily complexes will remain, but they would like to have a corporate campus. They'd like to have a La Centera type retail development. And so you can see if you read through this, and it's again in the report, that we have lost some of the residential development that was planned last year. Much of it is delayed, and other parcels will be lost forever if they do become commercial. So here for the next 10 years, you see the growth in red of the largest, what we call res codes, that are going to be building out rapidly with new housing. And this shows post-2025 what could be expected in the district. So still growth after the 10-year projection period. Finally, it is important to know that there are, I think, 781 subdivisions and apartments. And of those, we've developed a ratio for each one. How many students are they per unit in your subdivision or in each apartment, for example? And that's what this represents. There's 0.64 students on the average, which is similar to the statewide average, not 2 students per house. 0.64 per house, and 0.36 in occupied multifamily units. That's what we have right now. And then I thought this was helpful, at least for us to use. We've summed all the subdivisions in each of these master plan communities, and you see that Copperfield now has a low ratio, 0.47. Town Lake, which has some designated active adult communities and also is attracting millennials, they have a 0.56. Then others have, like Bridgeland right now, 0.82, Westfield Village, a 0.86. Projected student enrollment is to be around 125,600 in a high growth scenario. A moderate growth scenario would estimate 122,900, and right now the district is just under 114,000. So a low growth scenario around 119,500, and we try to have a low and a high to bracket in this future reality so that board members and administrators can plan effectively. And for very conservative individuals, if you need to build schools under a low growth scenario, you feel comfortable in proceeding. So in sum, you can see here in the moderate growth, which is a low conservative, most likely scenario, this 122,900 for 2025. And what I'd like to do now is have Stacy Tapera mention briefly what we anticipate for each current attendance zone in regard to growth and what the implications are in terms of the timing of future schools.
Thank you. So 123,000 students, how does that relate to the capacity of the schools, both current and planned, and the timing? This is a bit of a review, this slide, of what you've just heard, but it's important to emphasize that that the projections that we're providing this year have decelerated in growth somewhat from last year for three major reasons. Dr. Gussman mentioned along the Grand Parkway corridor the potential for many of these large parcels of land to become commercial, industrial in nature, as opposed to the general focus on residential that we were seeing last year, and that's as a result of the FedEx distribution center that's going in. Secondly, and very importantly, of course, the oil price slump is really having a big impact on new housing construction. And when areas like the west side of the district along the Grand Corridor are the epicenter of new housing growth, they also become the epicenter of decline when things slow down. And so those factors are also dovetailed with the district has seen smaller and smaller incoming kindergarten classes. Particularly this year, the kindergarten class was almost 700 students smaller than the previous year's kindergarten class. And so when we age those students forward, that small class aging through to the 12th grade as older classes are matriculating out, that in itself will cause a deceleration in growth. So with all that being said, let's look at colors here. This shows the elementary attendance zones, and the colors represent the percent utilization of students in this school year, 15-16, compared to the capacity of the schools. So it's important to remember that these represent resident students, where the students that live within the attendance zone. There are some transfers in and among schools, and so the numbers that you would see in the report will not exactly match the enrollment numbers that you know to be true, but these are resident students because we can only project resident students in the future. So the areas of red represent areas where 120% of the capacity, the resident student population is 20% higher than the capacity of the schools that they can hold. So I draw your attention to the northeast side with Matsky and Hancock that will be accommodated in the upcoming rebuild of Matsky Elementary in 2017. There are also other areas, for example, Joel and Andre on the southwest side that are both exceeding 110% capacity, and that will be accommodated in the second campus built adjacent to Joel. But in general, for the short term, those are really the only the areas of real concern. But now let's jump 10 years forward. And not surprisingly, the entire west side is colored red and orange. Now, we'll talk about this in more depth in just a minute, but the district owns sites that you can see in gray on the west side in Bridgeland, in Mira Mesa, adjacent to Cy Park at the Hagar site. And so the planning is underway, has been and continues to be underway for accommodating this growth on the west side, but this just gives you a visualization of where it's coming. At the middle school level, the recent zoning effort has done a good job of kind of cleaning up feeder patterns and balancing enrollment such that there are no areas of intense overcrowding at the middle school level currently. 10 years out, not surprisingly, the west side is red and orange. So the sites that the district owns adjacent to Cy Park, as well as adjacent to high school number 12 in Bridgeland, will accommodate this future overcrowding, driven in the short term by overcrowding at Thornton and Hopper for the Cy Park location, and then later the Bridgeland site in order to relieve Smith. And then finally at the high school level, these are the 2015-16 high school attendance zones and the 2015-16 resident high school students. It's not surprising to see all the orange on the west side, which is the reason that the next two schools are planned. You see the two schools in gray, Cy Park and high school number 12. So when we skip 2 years forward, we've opened both schools. All of the attendance zones have been decided and have stabilized. So those new schools and the schools impacted like Cy Ranch will be temporarily less utilized, but even this is purple means it's less than 90% utilized. So that is what the utilization is projected to look like when all the new schools are open. And then 10 years later, again, we're right back where we started with some more red on the west side, but this is not surprising to anyone, I think. But now that the high school 12 attendance zone has been defined, then we can more accurately look to where high school 13 might be needed and when. And I have to say that when I first heard that the district was going to be zoning for two high schools in subsequent years at the same time, I thought, am I old enough to retire yet? But I have to say that the process went remarkably well, and from my perspective, and one of the challenges that always happens when opening a new school in a high growth area is the temptation to fill the new school too quickly, because districts are afraid of having an underutilized school for a year, and everybody wants to go to the new school, of course. But I think this process has done a very good job of balancing that, utilizing the schools in the short term, but not overcrowding them so much that you accelerate the need for high school 13. So with that being said, let's look at this chart that summarizes sort of the working plan as it is for the opening of new schools in the future. Of course, Cy Park High School opening in August. And then in 2017, we have a burst of activity with 3 new elementary schools. We talked about the Matsky Replacement School, the second campus next to Joel, and in Bridgeland, both an elementary school and high school number 12, all of those opening in the fall of 2017. Now, the next step would be in about 2020 or so, middle school 19 at the Hagar site, which is adjacent to Cy Park. And then the following year in 2021, another elementary, this time in the Northwest, there has been discussion for several years about the need for a school in that area in order to relieve overcrowding at Swanky, Keith, and Alt. And now there's recently in the past year has been an approval of a railroad crossing up there in order to facilitate the development of those large parcels just south of 290. And so that has really solidified or accelerated the potential for residential growth up there and solidified the need for an elementary up there. However, if there could be some rezoning done among the schools, the existing schools to the north of 290, then this new school in the northwest could possibly be postponed by a few years. And so that's something that the district might consider. That would be followed by the Mira Mesa site that the district owns in 2023, and the Hagar site for an elementary, and then potentially a site in the far south. The district does not own a site in the far south, and this has always kind of been a distant horizon, wait and see, but it's becoming more and more of a reality as we move forward in time. And then finally, back to middle school in Bridgeland in about 2025 or so. And finally coming onto our radar can be planning for high school number 13 towards the very end of this projection period. A third elementary school in Bridgeland can now be postponed beyond our projection period. It will be needed eventually. It's just that with the deceleration, we're just postponing beyond this 10-year projection period. So with that, I can close and take any questions.
Thank you very much for that extensive report, ladies. It's amazing to look at the growth in our area. Are there any questions? Mr. Covey?
I've got your mower in the laundry, so y'all's books need to be smaller. I just got to tell you, y'all do an excellent job on this, and I've always been impressed since we brought y'all on, 4 years ago? Was it 4 years ago we did? And what a great job you did in helping us choose our last elementary school and putting it in the right position, which was excellent. Now, my business, and I say my business, I'm kind of retired, but we're understanding that oil is now, the surplus is being used up quite a bit. I think there was a report out of Saudi either today or yesterday, and there's a possibility that we're going to see the price of oil going up. Did you have anything that considered that?
So we are also researching daily that price. And while we don't have answers, we simply don't think it's going to ever solidify at 100 to 110, but be more in the 50 to maybe ideally $90 a barrel range. And so that's what we're assuming, and that's what we are applying to that moderate growth scenario. That it will be back in 2017 is our assumption, and we do have a series of assumptions that we put a great deal of effort into in chapter 6 of the report, or 5 of the report, and so those really help to define how we've arrived at the sort of the control total for the moderate growth scenario. And then that way we can temper the aspirations of developers to meet that optimum total.
And then a follow-up question. I was excited to see that Mason Road is a long-term plan. Mm-hmm. And
right.
being the age I am, exactly how long-term are we talking here?
So that is exciting, isn't it? And we are so pleased about the railroad crossings because that, when we've been fortunate enough to talk with the railroads, they tell us in Houston that they are using them 4 times more now, and there's no way you can talk them into crossings. So of course it took the ex-CEO of Chesapeake to get that accomplished, and that is a reality. And then I expect that will open up the other 2 sides of Mason West Green is the development owned by the Dunham family. And then on the other side is the Richfield family, and that huge parcel is just half in the district and the other half in Waller. And then the parcel that's for sale on the other side is a smaller, about 240 acre parcel. And so that all of those could benefit then from that access across the railroad. And the Ridgefield parcel is on both sides of the Grand Parkway. So there's going to be a lot of access in there, and those are the last large parcels by far, larger than any others in the district.
So
that
they're
remain.
actively talking with Railroad, and has Railroad agreed
It's done.
to do
It's
this?
been accomplished. They've
is.
succeeded. Mhm.
Okay.
And so then they will pay the vast majority of the Mason Road portion that's in their subdivision to be. And there is a concept plan for that subdivision. I've seen about 2 versions of that, so I think they're moving along pretty fast with it. And I've gotten some updates about it, but nothing definitive.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Ms. Blackshear?
Maybe I missed it, but do we have a date or year projection of when that crossing will go through at Mason?
No, no,
No, just future.
no, but when I get that, I will definitely give it to the administration.
Thank you.
At this point, it's up to the developers. They have permission, but it is up to the developers.
That's correct.
Anyone else on this side? Dr. Ogletree?
I believe in your presentation, you said you gave the ratio of children in the different subdivisions.
Yes, sir.
And I believe you mentioned Copperfield at
Having an average of 0.47 that's lower than it used to be, because those many students are aging out of the district and on to college and elsewhere, so the ratio has gotten lower there. We follow the trends in those ratios, and that helps us to think about the impact of those trends on elementary schools, for example. But what happens is that those homes regenerate with younger heads of households. It's just a matter of what day that will begin, what year. And it is a phenomenon that we have to follow carefully. It's really as important as looking at new housing, and that is understanding what's happening in these existing subdivisions.
Okay, that means I'll wait a year or so. I live in that area, and I didn't want to live in an aging senior retired area. But I'll wait for the next report.
They're coming, John. They're coming. Mr. Ryan?
I want to kind of follow up on John's. How do y'all project the regeneration? I was talking to Debbie during your presentation where Matsky, some of those neighborhoods around there that are older have really started to regenerate, but then you got an area like Copperfield. It's just a massive community. How do y'all project that regeneration?
That is such a good question, because that area is regenerating in that there's such a wealth of new retail development, and now also it's become a new epicenter for jobs. And so, yes, that area is regenerating faster than is the Copperfield Master Plan community. But we look at about 8 indicators, and it's very difficult, and it's not as accurate as projecting how many children will show up in each new added Bridgeland home, because that's so much more tangible. But yet, if we follow these trends through time, and we also got historic enrollment since we'd only worked with the district for 4 years, and we look at that too for these same subdivisions, and try then to understand how they're changing, because districts like Friendswood that every year have 24 to 28% more fifth graders than first graders, that's a dangerous sign, very frightening, because that means sooner or later they'll be closing elementaries. And so you just have to try to gauge for each of those subdivisions in Friendswood when they're going to regenerate, when the young families are moving in. And there are a lot of factors. And again, we use 8, and some of them deal with the availability of jobs and new retail, which is what you're describing. But also we look at whether or not there's a lake or some aesthetic that allows people to want to stay in a subdivision, you know, and be buried in their backyards virtually. They don't want to move for some aesthetic purposes.
And then on the projected growth, are you saying to the district it's in our best interest to, on the numbers you had, high, moderate, and low, to stay in the moderate range as far as our projected growth? That was a conservative, I think was the word you used.
You know, already we've had to backtrack so much relative to last year. And so we feel we have a conservative, moderate scenario that is useful, but at the same time, if you had a premonition that oil was going to go up to 80 or 90 a barrel, then you might want to use that high growth scenario in your thinking. On the other hand, if you had a fairly pessimistic view of and thought the price would remain the same, you definitely want to go to that low scenario.
Well, and based on the numbers you gave, the capacity of the schools in the western part of the district, I think that we have the flexibility to where if you see oil bump up, that we can go, oh.
That's right. And, you know, really, we work with the second highest growth, the second largest district, that is, in the state. And this district is the third in enrollment, the third largest district. And we work with the majority of all high growth districts that are large in the state. But this district is fairly unique in that it seems very well organized in regard to long-range planning. And that's marvelous because you're such a large district. It's so difficult to do. And yet the plans are in place to accommodate that high growth on the western side. And I think that hopefully will prove to be a good situation, although 1 or 2 of the schools will be less utilized than we thought last year initially, the year they opened. 2 of the schools.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your report. Would have liked it a little thinner, but that's your call. Y'all aren't getting paid by the page, are you? They're not, are they? Okay, good.
Dr. Ogletree, did you have another question?
I just wanted to appreciate what you said about opening up the new high schools, that we shouldn't feel that pressure to try to populate them, and we will already have considered that and talked about that, and it's good to hear it from you, the expert.
Mr. Jackson?
I appreciate your highlighting Copperfield. We talked about that 3 years ago and the potential implosion of population. So I'm glad we're keeping an eye on that. Have you been able to identify what the socioeconomic mix might look like on a going forth basis?
No, but we should look at that, and we should try to evaluate that in terms of the students lost relative to the students gained. And of course, as you note, the students gained tend to be upper socioeconomic that are affording homes that are much higher priced, significantly higher than are those homes where the students are lost or have aged out of subdivisions. So I don't think that we're going to see in the near term any downturn in terms of socioeconomic characteristics. The income in this district, the median income is significantly higher than the Houston region. The educational level significantly higher, and I don't think we're going to see a change in that in the near term.
To follow up on that, we had a fairly rapid increase from about 45% to a little over 48%, edging up almost just shy of 49 of economically disadvantaged, but it appears as if we have hit a ceiling at that point. Let me put words in your mouth.
Okay.
Does it appear that that ceiling is going to be maintained?
Well, one thing I've noticed, of course, as a demographer, it's hard to understand why the state can have 60% disadvantaged when you can't have more than half of the population disadvantaged. But nonetheless, it seems to have statewide, it's been leveling off and it's declined by 1%. And so I don't know that Cyfair is leveling off as much as maybe a definitional change, perhaps.
I would applaud the fact that the presentations given at the Chamber of Commerce, from an economic overview, but also from individual developers, say by Peter Houghton, all conform to the presentation and the overview that you gave tonight. Always find it very comforting when you hear from multiple sources the same general concept and the same general trend. Clearly what we heard at the Chamber of Commerce is this oil downturn is not going to be like the way it was. This oil downturn was much sharper and much faster. Although for those of us who lived through it, and I know that Mr. Covey did as well, last time it seemed to be awfully rapid, but this time it was much sharper. Are we continuing to have an impact on our district from gentrification of Houston? Or does that appear also to be leveled off? And the reason why I ask that, it appears from your presentation that approximately 10% of our student body comes from apartments.
I wish I knew that precise percent because it's growing every year. The percent in apartments is growing each year, and that happens as a district matures. The district is still coveted, it's still in demand, and so for every 5 acres that's available, that's an opportunity for an apartment complex. And so I think that percent will continue to increase, and yet I don't know if it's 10% right at the moment, but if you saw that it was, that sounds right. It sounds right.
More or less.
We can look it up.
More or less.
Mhm.
A question that I asked last year as well as the year before, did you happen to prepare a graphic that would show how this year's estimates compare to that of the prior years?
Do you mean by subdivision?
No,
or-
I just mean overall growth, that sort of thing.
Well, overall, we know that we downturned the growth maybe by, for the 10-year period. I don't know, I'd have to check on that, and I can get back, we'll get back with you about that because we need to know that too. You know, one of our weaknesses, we're so determined to estimate accurately forward from this year, we don't check enough to see how it matches last year, because we're always estimating forward. So we'll check on that and let you know by year how it differed, because I know it's a little lower. And believe it or not, more than the oil price plunge, it was that decline in kindergarten that has such a big impact. And kindergarten had already been tapering down, and so we have to watch that closely.
On the reduction in kindergarten, and this is more of a rhetorical question, but as we have a reduction in kindergarten, is some of that attributable to other providers, and does that impact our building designs as we go forth? And the reason why I bring that up is best practices suggest that you bring kindergarten in-house, but they require a completely different layout, different plumbing, different walls, that sort of thing. So it is in fact an investment. So once again, I'm not expecting an answer, I'm just asking that
You know,
in general.
we did look at the births 5 years previously already prior to this year. We knew it was going to be down. But then so often net in-migration makes up for that. And so we just didn't realize it would be that great. And again, part of it is simply the cost of new housing has risen to the point where the younger home buyers are having difficulty. So, but yet the millennials are now finally, they're a smaller proportion than they should be in this district. In other words, the urban core, for example, as you would expect in some other suburban districts, have a higher proportion of millennials than this district, but they are increasing each year.
Well, certainly I know that when Peter Houghton spoke to the chamber 3 years ago, he said there was zero interest in building starter homes. And you're saying that trend, or his forecast, is in fact being fully realized each additional year. Excellent report. Appreciate the information.
Thank you very much.
May not be the information we necessarily want to see, but the facts are what the facts are. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Any other questions by board members? Dr. Henry?
Just one comment that I wanted to make in relationship to the building program that we're currently in. Of course, number one, you know that the 2014 bond program was primarily a renovation, and it wasn't about new facilities as much, but also going all the way back to 2007, we're still in the process of catching up from the downturn of 2008 when we did not build high schools and other schools. So the facilities we have going on right now are gravely needed. So hopefully we'll be caught up in a couple of years.
Mr. Jackson?
One follow-up observation I would make. Years ago, I sat out there in the blue sheets and blue chairs in the audience and listened to how the district automatically changed the capacity of our schools and made the capacity of our schools larger without adding any square footage. And I know that we've been advised that we've had to obtain a waiver from the state for being able to enhance the capacity of our schools without adding square footage. The capacity numbers that you are using, I would suspect, are still our current defined capacity as opposed to how we defined the capacity some 6 or 7 years ago.
That's correct.
So the excess capacity is actually greater than it would have been 6 years ago, and the undercapacity is not as significant. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for a very thorough and impressive report. We have a second report. It's a written report. B, the administration will provide a written report of the School Health Advisory Council, SHAC. It's our annual activities report. And this is questions only, I do believe. Am I correct on that?
Yes, ma'am, you are correct. If you have
Garcia?
any questions, Bevan Gordon, our Director of Health Services, is here to assist as well.
Very good. Any questions, board, on the written report? Mr. Covey?
I'm just going to leave it on. I'm sorry. Coming back from, where's Bevan? Is she here?
Yes.
There you are, Bevan. Yeah. No, that's okay. No, just coming back from the from DC and knowing that they are really making a push trying to change some of the nutritional things that have been pushed on us by the federal government. And in talking with each of the representatives and senators that I talked to, they're really on this, trying to change it somewhat. And I'm sure you're being updated on that, right?
Definitely. I think also, I don't know if Darren's here. I was going to say Matt Morgan. Yeah, Darren and Matt probably could answer that a little bit better. This was a function of the SHAC, but they helped a great deal with the nutritional considerations that we were making. So the SHAC was considering some changes to the policy.
She's looking at
Yeah, Darren, come on up.
Darren, come forward.
I was waiting to see what she said.
He can say it much more eloquently than I can, so I'll let him talk about those changes.
I'll try to be brief, but that is not my strong suit. But there are currently a couple of proposals to do some significant changes to the current child nutrition bill. It is up for reauthorization since 2015. That has not been done. There's a Senate bill, there's a House bill. They're not in agreement But I do get regular updates from both our state and local organization on what's going on. One of the things that's in there, in the House side, is a proposal to do block grants and pilot block grants for child nutrition, which for the state of Texas, it would be about a $72 million decrease in our funding and would lock funding in. So it is, I mean, it's an item that we're very aware of. And, you know, me and folks on my staff do regular communication too with the offices of our legislatures, because it's a big deal that will significantly affect us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Ryan?
I'm just curious on why we have a strong recommendation to select non-food fundraisers, and this is coming from a food fundraiser buyer.
So I think the biggest considerations were food allergies. So a lot of the
Keep going.
and the other thing is, of course, making nutritionally sound choices. And so we've taken a lot of things out of vending machines that have high calorie content, high fat content, high sugar content, things like that. So we think that if we're doing things that are fundraisers, we may be adding those back and not meeting smart snack criteria with those foods.
But as far as the fundraisers, like the FFA, and they sell a lot of beef. It's really healthy. Pork.
Yeah. These are fundraiser exempt days, so you can't sell foods that are competing during the school day. So this would give our campuses a few days where they can sell foods that ordinarily they would not be able to sell.
Okay, so I can still get my FFA fundraiser.
And again,
okay.
Right. These fundraisers are only limiting foods that can be consumed at the time of purchase. So for instance, if you were buying a steer, unless that was during the school day, and you intended to eat the steer there, it's all good. It's really meant to address candy bar sales, and primarily it is candy bar sales. And so the Shack was really recommending that instead of focusing on fundraisers like that, they focus on things like the fun runs, fitness days. Like there are several things they're doing at the elementary that are really raising booster-thon. It raises a ton of money, and it doesn't put sugary stuff in kids' hands where they're not going to eat a lunch. And that was really the intention of it. And so it's just a proposal to kind of limit that by grade level.
Yeah, it's a bummer. To be honest with you. But y'all did a great job on it. I like the sugary snacks.
You're just lamenting what you can't purchase.
I'm glad
at
I'm not
school.
in elementary school anymore.
Any other questions?
That was kind of my question, was kind of piggybacking on what Don was saying, because I was trying to figure out, so how many, so it would be World's Finest Chocolate, things like that, I'm just thinking of all those PTO clubs and booster clubs and everybody that'll, this might be a change for them, something they've made a lot of money on in the past, and so I was just kind of wondering. So before, how many, was there a limit to how many
There were none.
foods? Okay, so now it can be up to 6. Okay. Okay. All right, thanks. Thanks.
Any other questions on this report? All right. Let's move to our action items consensus. 6A, the board will consider approving the tax refunds of $500 or greater for Cypress-Fairbanks ISD. Can that stay on the consensus agenda, everyone? Great. Moving to our 7 action items non-consensus, I want everyone to know that...
6B.
Oh, I didn't see the 6B, I'm sorry.
Darcy, I'm sorry, I had a follow-up question on, about the fundraisers.
Okay.
Like, the question is per school for the year? So say like a high school that has a band and a drill team and a FFA and everything, so is it
6 days.
Okay.
Um,
But is it for the whole school, like where they have to coordinate if they're going to sell food?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and 6 is really the maximum that is allowed by state law. Initially, the federal law that passed that we had to implement last year, which was part of the Shack report last year, the feds had said it was up to states to tell schools how many days they could have. At that point, Texas chose no exemptions. And we presented the report to the board. About a day later, the Texas legislature said, you know what, you can have 6 exemptions. So we had already changed the policy. So when we were talking about it with the SHAC, we got input from parents, input from principals at each level as well. We said, look, you've got 6 to play with. You know, how would you like to distribute it? And so we had some people who wanted none, some who wanted 6, but that's kind of where it fell.
Okay, well, I was just trying to think of principals, you know, organizing all the boosters from the parents and how to figure out who gets to sell what when. And then my, I guess, follow-up question is, so this is for things that would happen at school. Say a booster club has a sale outside of school.
Right. If it is outside of school.
You can tell I still have kids in the school
Right.
before we're doing fundraising.
Right. No, but if it is outside of school, it's fine. Another thing just to throw out there to clarify, because it comes up actually in lots of the Q&A that's issued both by the state and the federal government, is cookie dough. So like cookie dough, for instance, the intention is not that you eat it that day. So it can be sold, although I have been at schools, purchased cookie dough and eaten it that day. But no, so cookie dough kind of, it exists on its own, but it really is, you know, it's going to be the candy.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure it all out.
No problem.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that item? All right, we've talked about 6A, and that is the tax refunds, and that will be stay on our consensus. The 6B, the board will consider approving the minutes of the May 16th, 2016 regular meeting. May that stay also on the consensus?
Yes.
Great. As we look at our non-consensus items, our action items, I want to point out that item 7A, number 8, has been removed from the agenda. So you guys, we're not going to be considering that tonight. And that is about digital menu board hardware and software for food service. So starting with 7A, the board will consider awarding bids and contracts and/or authorizing purchase orders as recommended in the posted agenda item for appliance repair parts, art and miscellaneous school supplies, art paper, athletic all activities student accident insurance, beverages, building alert systems, desktop computers, dry grocery, fire alarm and smoke detection with voice evacuation, food service equipment, frozen and refrigerated foods, fruits and vegetables, ice cream, milk and juice, office supplies, public address system for Reed Elementary, 18 school liability, privacy and information security, and automobile insurance renewal, security courier services, software for STAR test analysis, software license and maintenance renewal and expansion, structural pest control, and finally, workers' compensation stop loss renewal. Do we have any questions on any of those items? Mr. Jackson?
On item number 20, I appreciate the fact that this went out for bid. I asked about this several years ago. I think this is a good expenditure of funds. On item 21, the question I have, I can receive the answer offline, but approximately how many students will we be serving with our Achieve 3000 license? Thank you.
Mr. Jackson, I don't have the exact number, but I can bring it on Monday. But I can tell you that we at all, and we have more licenses at our Title I schools than we have at our non-Title I schools, but it is at every single school. But I can bring you the exact number of licenses and send that to you.
I'm not sure these microphones are working. Frankie, can you hear the microphones out there?
She couldn't hear your question.
Okay.
All right.
In the back. So I heard it click on right now. Okay, great. So I think that we have kept all 23 items under 7A, and all will be on consensus in summary. B, the board will consider approving the budget amendments for the period of April 1st, 2016 through June 30th, 2016. Do we have any questions on that? Any questions? May that stay on consensus or move to consensus. All right. C, the board will consider approving a resolution for the commitment of the district's fund balance. That is the GASB statement number 54 requires that the board formally commit fund balance reserves reflected in the annual financial statements. Any questions on that? With none, can that stay on consensus or move to consensus? Great. I would suggest that we probably want to keep 9 on D on non-consensus, because that is our budget, and we are going to have a budget presentation on Monday, if that's agreeable to the board. Great. E, the board will consider approving a list of qualified financial institutions, brokers, dealers, and investment advisors that are authorized to engage in investment transactions with the district. Do I have any questions on that? Mr. Jackson?
Not a question, merely a statement as to whether or not we move it to consent or keep it on non-consent. I'm still in ongoing discussions with legal counsel as to whether or not I have a disclosure item with respect to this and whether or not I would need to abstain. If it gets moved to the consent agenda, I, of course, would have to abstain from everything on the consent agenda. But right now, counsel has not given me a definitive answer. I expect to have one by Monday.
Well, then why don't we just move that to stay on the non-consent? That way we don't have to deal with it on Monday. Thank you, Tom, for bringing that up. Dr. Ogletree, do you have a question?
Just, Stuart, the different financial entities that are listed here on 7E, are there any changes or any new additions as opposed to last year when we did this?
Yes, sir. You see on the list there under broker-dealers, UBS Financial Services is a new listing, and we have removed from the list that you approved last year the firm of Stern, Agee, and Leach. They were not providing us with competitive bids, and so we've removed them.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right. F, the board will consider a resolution approving the district's investment policy and investment strategy, the investment officers of the district, and the independent sources of instruction related or relating to investment responsibilities for the investment officers of the district and investment training hours. Do we have any questions on that? May that move to Mr. Ryan?
Stuart, is this a requirement that we have every year, or are we changing our investment strategies?
No, we're required every year
Okay.
to bring this to the board and for you all to approve our investment policy as well as the investment strategy. And also at the end of the year to approve the training hours of the investment officers. Each of us are required to have 8 hours each year of investment training.
Thank you.
May that move to consensus? Very good. G, the board will consider approving board members to serve as delegate and alternate delegate to the 2016 Texas Association of School Boards TASB Annual Delegate Assembly. Currently, our representatives are Bob Covey as the delegate and Dr. John Ogletree as the alternate, and I recommend that we stay with those two as they have a great deal of time invested in that already. May I have a motion on that?
We
Oh,
do
no
Monday.
motion. Can we keep
does
that?
Maybe you do it separate since we got to name the name.
Okay. We're going to have that on non-consensus, Lisa. H, the board will consider approving administrators' request to pilot the Cypress-Fairbanks teacher appraisal system at identified campuses. Any questions?
I think Roy wants to.
We do.
Okay, well, you want to?
We do have a brief presentation.
Oh, okay.
President Linda Horner, our Director of Staff Development, will provide that brief presentation.
Thank you.
Good evening. Cypress-Fairbanks Teacher Evaluation and Support System, CF-TEST, because we love acronyms, at identified campuses. We would like to present you with an overview of the Texas Teacher Evaluation and Support System, T-TEST, that we will use to inform decisions regarding the adoption of a local appraisal process that we have coined as CF-TEST. Currently, we've been using our locally adopted version of the Professional Development and Appraisal System, PDOS, also known in our district as CF-PDOS, for the last 15 years. As you're aware, in this span of time, education's evolved. Things have changed, and because of this, the state of Texas seeks to update the tools of evaluation to reflect what's happening in today's classrooms throughout the state, and a desire to align with what many districts like Cy-Fair are already doing on our campuses, which is creating open, collaborative campus environments with a constant focus on instructional and professional improvement. The aim of the appraisal system seeks to maintain a focus on providing continuous, timely, informative feedback to educators so that they can improve their practice. And so with this in mind, please allow us to provide you with the backdrop, the rationale, and the approach of the district as it relates to T-TEST. In order to better understand the state's move to a new appraisal system, it is incumbent upon us to share the backdrop behind the state appraisal system. The new state appraisal system, T-TEST, utilizes many tools to help support teacher instruction and student learning. T-TEST is intended to promote what we call a growth mindset in educators by providing a structure to self-reflect and receive ongoing, meaningful feedback from appraisers. The T-TEST was designed by Texas educators, education leaders, educator organizations, and policy experts in 2013-14. During the 14-15 and 15-16 school years, districts throughout the state piloted the system in order to provide critical feedback for the refinement process. There are three key differences between the current state system, PDOS, and the new system, T-TEST. The first key difference is that the former state appraisal system, PDOS, consists of 8 domains, while the T-TEST rubric consists of 4 domains, which are more comprehensive. And as you can see, these include planning, instruction, learning environment, and professional practices and responsibilities. Take a moment to consider what the T-TEST rubric strives to do. T-TEST strives to capture the holistic nature of teaching, the idea that a constant feedback loop exists between teachers and students, and gauging the effectiveness of teachers requires a consistent feedback on how students respond to their teachers' instructional practices. For these reasons, each of the observable domains in T-TEST focuses on both students and teachers rather than separating them out into separate domains, as is currently done in PDOS. The second key difference is that the former PDOS had 4 performance levels, while the T-TEST consists of 5 performance levels. As you can see, these performance levels include distinguished, accomplished, proficient, developing, and improvement needed. The descriptors of the levels of performance in T-TEST differ from PDOS. It's not moving forward. Can you help me out, Joel? The descriptors and levels of performance in T-TEST differs from PDOS in that T-TEST articulates different practices between performance levels, whereas PDOS differentiates between performance levels based on how often a teacher did the same practice over time. The third key difference relates to measures of student growth. Under Section 1002D and E of Chapter 150 of the adopted Commissioner's Rules concerning educator appraisal, it states that beginning with the 17-18 school year, each teacher appraisal shall include the academic growth of the teacher students at the individual teacher level as measured by one or more of the following growth measures. Those include student learning objectives, student portfolios, pre- and post-test results on district assessments, or the value-added data based on the state assessment results. Additionally, what's interesting is that if calculating a single overall summative appraisal score for teachers, the measure of student growth, as described in subsection D of this section, shall count for at least 20% of a teacher's overall score. If not, then no weighting of student growth is required. It is the if not condition that the district seeks to pursue in terms of student performance measure by way of a locally adopted appraisal process. As you are aware, Dr. Henry has advocated strongly against tying a student's test scores to a teacher's evaluation. It is the if not statement that allows the district room to evaluate teachers without the weighting of student growth in an overall appraisal score. With these key differences in mind, let's take a moment to consider the state's rationale for moving to a new appraisal process. The state's rationale is rooted in two key changes. First, the new state standards built from a growth mindset were fleshed out in a new appraisal instrument, and in turn, Chapter 150 was rewritten with new pieces that paved the way for a new appraisal process based on continual feedback and reflection. And finally, with the backdrop as well as the rationale in the forefront of their thinking, the district, under the guidance of the superintendent and his cabinet, desires to move to a locally adopted appraisal process. This approach would allow the district to maintain its commitment to a continuous improvement process that's provided in two appraisal models, Plan 1 and Plan 2. In our present appraisal process, teachers are eligible to move from Plan 1 to Plan 2, subject to the approval of the building principal, by earning a summative performance score of proficient or exceeds on each of the domains of the CFPDOS formal instrument for 3 consecutive years, as well as meeting the district's professional development expectation. Additionally, this approach would allow campus principals to determine the level of support needed for each teacher, and it would allow us to shape a process that's reflective of the district's commitment to continuous improvement and collaboration between teacher and appraiser. Finally, this approach would allow us to determine the areas of student growth measurement as well as how to weave that element into the actual appraisal process. As the year progressed, the district has communicated to the varied stakeholder groups, including the district and campus leaders at the March District Leadership Training, as well as the District Educational Improvement Council in April. Then in April and May, principals shared this information with their campus performance objective councils at each of their respective campuses, and finally with you as a board members at tonight's meeting. Moving forward, we seek your approval to continue to utilize the CFPDOS instrument for the 16-17 school year while conducting a small pilot of CFT tests at 1 elementary, 1 middle school, and 1 high school. Then in 2017-18, the district intends to discontinue the CFPDOS and implement CF tests. During the pilot year, the district will garner and utilize feedback throughout the process through an advisory council. The charge of the council is to support the district by serving to provide input and feedback throughout the process of developing a new locally adopted appraisal system that's responsive to the parameters set forth by TAC Chapter 150 as well as TEC 21.352, while maintaining the district's commitment to a continuous improvement process that is fleshed out in 2 models, Plan 1 and Plan 2. As you can see, the makeup of the council includes principals from each of the 3 pilot campuses, assistant principal, 1 from each of the 3 pilots, as well as the directors of instruction from the middle school and high school levels, and of course teachers from each pilot campus, and in that teacher group having representation of each grade level, each content area, as well as our teacher organizations. The work of the council is to inform the development of the structure and then to provide feedback concerning that process throughout the 16-17 school year as the appraisal process unfolds at each of the pilot campuses. So in closing, as you consider the information we've shared with you, we would like to invite you to ask questions regarding this request.
Thank you very much for your report. Any questions? Mr. Jackson?
Oh, and I have somewhat more of a statement, but I think it's really interesting. I'm curious as to how the principals of the pilot schools, are they, looking forward to it? Are they kind of thinking, oh, this might be a really good thing? Because change is hard, I know. But it sounds like not everything that comes from the state we always find interesting or want to do, but this to me seems like a good one. I love the change in practice versus how many times you do the task. I think that as a preschool teacher, I saw that in students that sometimes you have to change the way that you're trying to teach the child so that child can get it. At Lone Star, I teach different learning styles, and so everybody's different. So I think that this can be a real blessing. And I did want to state though that, and I appreciate Dr. Henry's not wanting to tie this to how we assess our teachers, because at Lone Star I see one semester to the next the different students that I have concerning their drive, their dedication, and they are human, and all of our students are human, and they're going to have good days and bad days, and hopefully that's not a test day, But so I appreciate, Dr. Henry, that you've always been strong about that. So.
I appreciate your comments, and I will say to you that the 3 pilot campuses, the principals, didn't immediately say yes. They asked some really great questions. It wasn't like we had to twist our arms and talk them into it. They just wanted to know what they were getting into.
Yes.
And rightly so. But we couldn't have picked 3 better pilots. We've been meeting over time. We meet what we call a core advisory council, which is just our pilot principals, and then their directors of instruction plus members of my team as well as human resources. And then we have the actual full advisory council, which is cross membership from each of those respective campuses along with their principals.
Well, I really look forward to hearing about this over the next year. It's great. Thanks.
Mr. Jackson?
I appreciate the fact that you have incorporated review of the superintendent. He had a very well-written op-ed piece. I followed it up at that following board meeting with a rather impassioned plea and support, citing the deleterious effects of tying teacher evaluation to a single item. I know I offended some with the amount of time I took, but then again, I am a talker, so you knew what you were getting when I got elected, I think. Listening to the different stakeholder groups that you chatted with, I did not hear that you mentioned that you met with the 3 primary teacher organizations. Do you envision that to happen during the pilot process, or will that really happen after it becomes effective for the entire district?
No, it will be throughout the process. Our goal is you create buy-in by seeking input from folks, and so it would be to involve them in our conversations that we have, and then of course we do have that representation within the members of those pilot campuses that are a part of the council.
For the teachers who will be participating, I presume some of those will in fact belong to the 3 primary teacher organizations?
And they do.
Your presentation was excellent. Parts were a little dense. Is your presentation, will it be on the website?
That's our goal. One of the things as we have been talking in our meetings about this process was to provide that information through the website as well. Again, we need to be as transparent as possible. We're not making decisions behind closed doors. Our desire really is to seek the input and the feedback from our stakeholders so that we have an appraisal process that truly does represent what Cyfair is all about.
Very good, thank you.
And Mr. Jackson, it'll also be posted, since it was presented at the DEIC, it will be posted on their website as well, and we'll continue to utilize the DEIC as a way to make sure that people are aware of where we are in the process, along with the campuses doing so with their CPOCs, their Campus Performance Objective Councils.
Excellent, thank you.
Dr. Ogletree? Okay.
Will this council be made of diverse people in the district?
Yes, that was our goal. Our principals at each of the pilot campuses sought the representation so that we literally could represent a cross-section of the folks on that campus. So content-wise, experience-wise, grade level-wise, so a good cross-section of folks who were on that campus.
But also racial or all the wises?
Absolutely.
Okay. The other thing, is it possible that a teacher under the present grading system will fare and has fared well, and then under the new one would not fare so well? And is that the purpose of the study?
Yeah, I mean, that's the purpose of the pilot. You know, our best lessons are learned in that safety net of that pilot, so we can see what kind of impact it might have on a teacher's overall scores as it relates to the appraisal process.
When it comes to evaluations and going to this one, how much is it subjective and how much is the evaluation objective?
I mean, that's the goal of this particular instrument, is that it provides a more objective picture of what's happening in that classroom. It is definitely a much more comprehensive instrument. If you were to take a look at it, you would see that it definitely just kind of digs down into what's happening in that classroom and the impact that it has on kids and it has on learning.
And in the pilot schools, since it is a pilot, let's say a teacher really grades terrible on this thing. Since it is a pilot, that will not affect her status here.
That is
in the
correct.
district.
That is correct.
All right.
Mr. Covey?
Just, hasn't this appraisal system been piloted by some other districts for the last 2 years?
Yeah, the last 2 years. Initially, it was going to be a 1-year pilot that turned into a 2-year pilot. But yes, it's been road tested, I guess I could say that, across the state of Texas. And then the desire of the district is to take that instrument because we certainly realize that it's bested, it's been road tested, it's based in research and best practice of what's going on in classrooms today. So we'll use that to inform what our instrument looks like. So it's not a mirror image of it, but it's really pretty close.
The overall feeling for the people that have piloted this for 2 years, is it positive as far as this, or do you know?
Definitely made adjustments along the way in how the process is facilitated. So the state, I think, really did a great job of listening to the voice of the customer and to ensure that it's an instrument that is going to work most effectively whenever they implement it statewide.
Yeah. Are there a lot of other districts that are doing what we're doing right now and piloting for a year?
It's a mixed bag in the conversations that we had. Some of them have totally developed even before T-Test, even before T-Test was even envisioned or as it was starting to be envisioned. They'd already moved to a new locally adopted appraisal process, and some are like us where we just kind of waited in the wings to watch to see what was going to unfold. Some are going with T-Test. Others are going to go kind of the route of Cyfair and do kind of a hybrid model. and then others are going to develop their own locally adopted, straight from the ground up appraisal process.
And then the training for people that are going to be observing it's got to be quite in-depth, right?
Yeah. So that'll be our charge next spring as we move forward and into next summer. But it's a great opportunity to kind of put a positive spin on that, if you're okay with that. It's a great opportunity for all of us to kind of reset and determine and make certain that we are all headed in the same direction, that we're literally not only in the same book, but that we're on the same page as it relates to promoting the growth of our teachers.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Blackshear?
Approximately how many school districts would you say have already tested it?
I don't know those numbers. I don't know if someone else in the room who is a team member might know.
25, including the refinement schools.
Yeah. So Christina said approximately 20, 25 statewide.
And are they comparable size districts to Cyfair?
There's some larger ones,
Some larger ones?
not as big as Cyfair.
No, none of them are as large as Cyfair. I do know, being the third largest in the state, the two largest districts in the state were two of the ones I mentioned. I didn't call them by name, but they had already developed their own locally adopted appraisal system, so they didn't participate in the pilot. So all of the districts were smaller, but some of them only slightly smaller than us. I do believe the fourth and the fifth largest in the state were part of the pilot as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board questions? Mr. Jackson?
You mentioned that there was some interest in other districts following the hybrid approach. I believe the approach that management has outlined is the appropriate path to follow. I also know that the two larger districts that are bigger than we are have opted to go with a different approach. But I'm not certain that results will bear out that was necessarily the best decision on behalf of students. Are there other districts that are moving? Are there very many other districts moving with this hybrid that are taking taking the twist in the road, so you don't take one of the four measures and you're doing the other?
I can't speak to that specifically. I don't know if there's another member of the team that can.
So right now it's just, we will find that out in the coming year.
Yeah, we'll find out, what we've done is kind of informally assessed what others are doing, just to kind of compare and see who could be our compadres on this journey together, so that we can learn lessons from each other.
And I would say that I strongly support the underlying question of what Dr. Ogletree mentioned when he asked his question.
All right. Are there any further questions from the board? Dr. Henry?
Just a couple of comments. I think you have to look at what is the goal of the evaluation system. And the evaluation system's goal is to make young teachers good teachers, and then to make good teachers great teachers. And the philosophy that I've always held is you don't want your instructional staff to be your enemy. You want them to be your partner. So whatever we do, we need to try to grow good and great teachers in this district. And I think if you look at the research, there's no research that supports the total use of the t-test is the correct way to go. And in fact, if you'll look at the two larger districts, I know the one neighboring us is moving away from that a little bit, and the one up in North Texas, I guess I can say Dallas. Dallas has just dipped their toes in this the last 2 or 3 years, so it will be interesting to see how that goes. We have talked to teacher reps, and I have personally been involved with them a little bit with this, and I think they know my philosophy, and I think this district's philosophy is that we view teachers as our real resource in this district, and we want to do everything we can to make them our partner with the ultimate goal to improve student learning. And you don't do that with an adversarial relationship. Yes, they have to be evaluated, and yes, we want them to improve, but they're not our enemy. They're our partners. So I think that's our goal moving forward. And, in all honesty, and maybe I shouldn't say this, much of this, if you look at tying teacher evaluations to test scores, districts of innovation, a lot of this is so politically driven. And to be honest, it's to create division among school districts, and I don't want any part of that. So anyway, it's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. Thank you for your report. Can this move to consensus, or would you prefer that this be on non-consensus? Consensus is great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That moves us to item I. The board will consider approving on first reading additions, revisions, or deletions to district policies. 1, BE local board meetings. 2, CKE local safety programs, risk management, security personnel. That's a revision. 3, DNA local performance appraisal, evaluation of teachers, a revision. And 4, FFAC local wellness and health services, medical treatment, that's a revision. Any questions on those items? Seeing none, can that move to consensus? Perfect. All right, J, the board will consider approving on second reading additions, revisions, or deletions to district policies. 1, D, BD local, employment requirements and restrictions, conflict of interest, that's a revision. DH local, employee standards of conduct, that's a revision. 3, DIA local, employee welfare, freedom from discrimination, harassment, and retaliation, that's a revision. Number 4, EEH local, instructional arrangements, homebound instruction, that's a revision. 5, FB local, equal educational opportunity, a revision. And that is the last item under J. Any questions on those items? Seeing none, can that move to consensus? Great. That brings us to item number K. The board will consider approving the 2016 Harris County Protective Services Interlocal Agreement with the Harris County Protective Services for Children and Adults, HCPSA, to provide community youth services for students and families in Cypress-Fairbanks Independent School District. Any questions on that item? Seeing none, can that move to consensus? Yes. L, the board will consider approving construction proposals and contracts paid from the 2014 technology bond funds to the recommended contractor and authorize the superintendent or designee to execute all necessary documents related to such contracts as follows. 1, HVAC technology upgrades phase 2. Any questions on that item? Seeing none, can that move to consensus? M, the board will consider authorizing the superintendent or his designee to negotiate and execute a final contract for the procurement of electricity per terms of proposal number 16-05-4941 RFP. Do we need a closed session for that? Any questions on that? Can that move to consensus? Great. N, the board will consider approving change order number 3 to the construction contract with Satterfield and Ponticus for the installation of new fiber optic cabling from the MDF located in the classroom area to IDF locations within Cypress Park High School, and authorize the superintendent or designee to negotiate, execute, and amend all contracts necessary to complete this additional work. Any questions on that? Seeing none, can that move to consensus? Great. 0, letter O, the board will consider approving the Center Point Energy Houston Electric LLC blanket utility easement to provide electrical service for the satellite cold food warehouse. Do we need a closed session for that for anyone? Nope. Any questions on that? Seeing none, can we move that to consensus? Great. P, the board will consider approving the granting of the water meter easements to the City of Houston for water services to Bain Elementary School and Dean Middle School, and authorize the superintendent or designee to negotiate the final terms and execute all related documents. Any questions? All right, can that be moved to consensus? Okay. Q, the board will consider approving the granting of an unobstructed visibility easement to Harris County located at the corner of Greenhouse and West Road by Postma Elementary School, and authorize the superintendent or designee to negotiate the final terms and execute all related documents. Any questions on that one? Any questions on that one? Seeing none, can that move to consensus? All right. Brings us to R. The board will consider approving affiliation agreements with the University of Texas Health Science Center Houston and Professional Healthcare Education Service, Inc. to provide clinical placements in Cypress-Fairbanks ISD school clinics, which will fulfill the curriculum requirements for collegiate registered nurse, RN, and licensed vocational nurse, LVN, degree programs and refresher courses. Any questions on that item?
Great idea.
You want to make that statement?
When I reach this, I tell you what, it could be because I'm fat. I don't know.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. Yeah, that's part of it. But maybe if I sat backwards, I don't know. I just think this is excellent. This is a great idea. Thank you very much. I don't know who was the genius in coming up with that. I'm sure it's Dr. Henry, but it's just, I'm so impressed with it. Thank you very much for doing this. Thank you.
It's always great to partner with our higher education institutions in the community. It's good for them and it's good for us. Seeing no other further questions on that, can we move that to consensus? All right. S, the board will consider approving a resolution to join and participate in the Southeast Texas Cooperative Purchasing Organization and authorize the superintendent or designee to execute all necessary documents related to the Southeast Texas Cooperative Purchasing Organization. Any questions on that item? Seeing none, can that move to consensus? Great. T, the board will consider approving an update of the district's hazardous traffic conditions resolution as required by TEA to receive supplemental transportation funding. This is for funding purposes only. No students will be affected. Any questions on that item? Seeing none, can that move to consensus? You have a question, Mr. Ryan?
Just to make it clear, we're not changing our busing situation and taking transportation away from neighborhoods. So for those of you at home, you're not losing your transportation. Just want to make sure everyone's clear on that so we don't get calls on that. Here to stay. Here to stay.
You want further clarification on that?
Nope. No, I don't. Just want
to make sure everyone...
I wanted the public to have further clarification on that. No changes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Can that be moved to consensus? Yes. U, the board will consider approving a one-time request for a Texas Education Agency waiver allowing the Cypress-Fairbanks ISD to offer a pre-K program that is less than 210 minutes daily during the 2016-17 school year. And we do have a very brief presentation on that one. The presenters are Dr. Macias and Mary Jadlowski.
Thank you, Ms. Mangoyan. It will be very, very brief. You may recall from our presentation on the 2016 and 17 instructional calendar that the enactment of House Bill 2610 mandates required instructional time for students be counted in minutes. You may recall that 75,600 minutes is the magic number, instead of the 180 days that was required in previous legislation, and that an instructional day must be at least 420 minutes. Well, this law currently includes the pre-kindergarten programs. We believe that this was probably not the intention, but nonetheless, it is currently part of the law. So since an instructional day must be at least 420 minutes, a half day must be at least 210 minutes. As you know, with the exception of Holbrook and the Francone full-day programs, our pre-K programs across the district are all half days. The morning program is currently 185 minutes, and the afternoon program is 190 minutes. The way this is set up right now, the morning and the afternoon with those minutes allows our teachers to have their duty-free lunch and their planning time between the time that the morning kids leave and the afternoon kids arrive. Well, this concern right now is not just ours, really. It's many districts across the state do not meet the 210 minutes requirement for the half-day pre-K. So TEA is allowing districts to apply for a one-year waiver to transition to the 210 minutes for pre-K. And so that's what we're asking the board to consider, or why we're asking the board to consider approving this one-time request for a TA waiver, allowing Cyfair ISD to offer a pre-K program that's less than 210 minutes for the 16-17 school year. So no, we're not reducing the minutes of the current program. We're looking at leaving it the same for 1 year. This will allow us time to the time needed to provide the additional curriculum, the resources, and to evaluate the additional cost that this is going to cost us, because once we go to the 210 minutes, it's going to overlap some. So the time for the teacher planning and the teacher lunch will no longer be there. So we're going to have to figure out if we need more staff in there to be able to cover the classes. So this will provide us time not only for the curriculum and the resources, but to also evaluate any additional costs as well as the transportation for our kids. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Dr. Macias. Any questions? You want to make a statement about that?
I just want to say, well, a little bit. Just, it sounds very logical. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine.
Yeah, it sounds logical to me as well. All right, so would we like to make that part of consensus? Very good. I want the public to know we only have a couple more items. We're getting towards the end. V, the board will consider approving the there is a list of students, of 244 students at 46 different facilities for off-campus physical ed Category 1 for the 2016-17 school year in the fall. Any questions on that list? Can that move to consensus? W, the board will consider approving the name of high school number 12. That will not be on consensus agenda. We will be talking about that on Monday.
Today?
Yeah, we're going to have an executive session, but we won't have a decision until Monday. We are going to have an executive session about that and discuss some of the contract requirements. Can I have a motion to go into the executive? That is the last item on our agenda tonight. Mr. Jackson?
Madam President, on item G, you moved that to non-consent without asking for any comment or discussion. May I make a comment on that?
Sure. What item is that?
That's the representation of test.
Oh, okay. Well, I did because we're going to talk about that on Monday. You want to have a comment now, Mr. Jackson?
Yes, Madam President, if I may.
Of course.
Thank you. It is roughly the same comment that I made last year as well as the year before. I'll preface it by saying that when Trustee Lotta Woodall was the representative to TASB, and I replaced her, she informed me that when I replaced her and when I was elected, that I would be a delegate to TASB. When I had to resign for health reasons verbally in December of 13 and then in writing in January of 14, Trustee Covey took over my unexpired term, and by virtue of him being elected by this board to replace my term, he immediately became a delegate to TASB. I've brought this up the last couple of times and did not make an issue of it, but I would suggest to the board that somebody might want to contact TASB. I did go ahead and call them today. They did confirm that I am in fact correct. I know that last year I was told, well, the form was poorly written and merely the manner in which it needs to be completed. But no, Trustee Lyda Woodall was correct as well. So Trustee Covey is, by the fact that he is a delegate of TASB, he represents the entire state. We here in Cy-Fair have the opportunity to elect a delegate representing Cy-Fair as well as an alternate. And we may decide not to do that as we did last year. We didn't have a delegate representing Cy-Fair because Trustee Covey represented the entire state as was appropriate. But I bring that up so that if anybody wants to contact TASB between now and Monday to verify what I'm saying, they certainly have time to do so as opposed to waiting until springing it on y'all on Monday night. I would point out that Ms. Hartley did in fact express interest in this. Last year she has served as an alternate, but the path that we're going on deprives this district of an additional representative if somebody from this district wanted to serve in that capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
I have a question that is, I know Bob's a
Gulf Coast?
Well, no, statewide delegate, that he's our TASB representative on, and I'm not opposed to anyone else serving as well, but I think in making this motion and voting on this, Bob can't, is your understanding that Bob cannot be, he can't represent Cy-Fair and the state, or can he? Because to say we had no representation when we had Bob representing us, is that what you're saying? I mean, I want to understand.
What I'm saying is, once again, this year I spoke with TASB. The person I spoke with is on the form that is in the board book, which is on page, whatever page it's on. Page 293 of the board book. The person I spoke with was Anissa Pope. What it says on the form, if one of your board members is also a TASB director or one of the 4 LAC representatives, do not designate this member. He or she will already be participating as a voting delegate in the assembly.
Just have you thought about it? We did too, so it doesn't matter.
But he's still, they're saying do not, but he's still representing, based on what we're doing here, he's still representing Cy-Fair.
Well, being part of TASB, his charge is to represent the entire state of Texas and not that of an individual district.
So your point, Mr. Jackson, is that we have a great opportunity to appoint a second delegate.
That is correct.
Okay, great.
And if we choose not to have a delegate, because, for example, last year, Dr. Ogletree was the alternate, so we did not have Director Covey was the delegate because he was a delegate, or rather a board member of TASB. So we did not have a named delegate from this district because he represented TASB.
Dr. Ogletree also could be.
Well, he was an alternate last year.
So we just have to make it official. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I do appreciate this information tonight, so we can.
We need to remove it from consent.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't on consent?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
I think Bob said we had to.
I'll go ahead and remove myself from the possibility because I care about you guys so much. I want you to have the I've served.
I just got to say,
That's selfish. That's
TASB
selfish of
appreciates
me.
you doing that.
That's selfish of me. Yeah, I want to let y'all go ahead.
All right, I thought we were going to be done soon, but you know. Dr. Ogletree?
It looks like what Tom has pointed out to us, that we would have the the possibility of having an extra person from Cyfair.
Yeah.
And I think that would be good. And Christine, let Christine be that
Well, I
person.
said, John, you could move up, and he said, Christine, you can do it. I would proudly serve if I was chosen, yes.
All right, so this is great that we know this tonight. Thank you, Tom.
We're in agreement
We're
on
just-
Christine. That's awesome. Thank you, Christine. Just the record, that wasn't a vote.
Positive we are not
We're
voting
not voting.
tonight.
We're just supporting Christine in her efforts.
Before, just, Marnie, could we get a clarification on the addendum that we have here? Whether that needs to be discussed in closed session if the board chooses to do so? I'm sorry.
Yes, and the addendum is step 2, I guess I would say, part 2 of the process we started last month. We, for non-renewals, it's a 2-step process. You propose and you give notice that you are going to non-renew, and then the staff member has the opportunity to request review of that. When they do not request review of that through TEA, then you follow through with what you've given proposed notice of. So this is the follow through, and I'm happy to remind you, or not remind you, I'm sure you remember, but go over it again in closed session, or if the explanatory note and the information you received last month still answers your questions, then closed session isn't necessary. It's up to you.
And I want to make sure that we do this properly, because this addendum item was posted for the first time today. So I assume we cannot discuss it in closed session, but I could be wrong, and I would like your clarification.
It was posted, okay, then we would not take action on it until Monday, and so it would be best. You're right, Darcy. I'm getting my...
That's my understanding on it, because it was posted today. Right, okay. All right.
And if you have a question, we can go in on Monday. You can look at it over the weekend.
So I was looking for a motion to go into closed session.
Madam President, I move that we go into closed session.
Second.
Great. We have our motion by Mr. Ryan, our second by Ms. Hartley. The board will now adjourn to closed session under Texas Government Code Open Meetings Act for the purpose stated in the posting of this meeting. And that is item agenda number W, letter W. If the board determines that any final action, final vote, or decision on any matter considered in the closed session is required, such final vote, action, or decision shall be taken upon the reconvening of this meeting in open session or at a subsequent meeting of the board in open session after proper notice has been posted. We will not be taking action tonight on this item. This is a discussion. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. We appreciate it, and we appreciate your patience as we had a rather long agenda, excuse me. Thank you.